The race is on, and as F1 heads into the Las Vegas, Qatar, Abu Dhabi triple header that will decide the destiny of the World Championship, we ask what twists and turns may lie ahead in the battle between on-form Lando Norris and struggling Oscar Piastri. Joining me to look ahead to the three events and reveal the real competitive picture are Scott Mitchell-Malm and Mark Hughes. Right, Scott, Lando Norris, 24 points clear of Piastri, 83 left to play for. Is there a way for the Australian to somehow reignite his title campaign?
Yes, absolutely. And he will say this as soon as he speaks in Vegas, I'm sure. He needs to win. He needs to find a way to start out qualifying and beating Norris again. And while the current momentum shift has been so stark and Piastri's apparent slump has been so severe, it might be very difficult to see how that can realistically happen. Very simple to say and outline what he needs to do, very much harder to do that in reality. I think you would have, and certainly we did when we were talking about it, the same could have been said and was said for Lando Norris a couple of months ago. He was in what looked to be a very abject position points-wise. Piastri wasn't missing any opportunities. He was pretty much finishing on the podium every single race and winning every second or third race. So the chances of Norris taking big chunks of points out of Piastri seemed quite remote. Possible, but remote. It's now roles reversed, but with obviously a premium on Piastri changing things much quicker because he's not got the time, and Norris has a points advantage. So if, and it's a big if at the moment based on the evidence of the last few weekends, if the trend of the majority of the season can be restored, Piastri can still win this World Championship. What will be decisive is whether or not what Norris has done is picked up on the underlying reality of the first half of the season, which is that Norris was slightly faster but more wasteful. And if he continues to convert or Piastri continues to struggle, then Piastri won't be able to do it because he won't have the time.
And Mark, why do you say that what Scott's laid out shows it's perfectly possible for Piastri to do it? If you're in Lando Norris's position, you're not super confident or complacent or anything, but you're in a very, very nice position where if you just tick off 3 good weekends, the points advantage is such that you probably will be able to close it out. And that's quite a nice position to be in, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a much nicer position than Piastri's for sure. If he finished second behind Oscar for the remaining 3 races, he still wins the title by coincidentally about the same number of points that they were swapped between them at the pit stop at Monza, the post pit stop, swap of positions at Monza. So that's got potentially a little sting in the tail if it goes that way. But yeah, basically, Scott's right. Oscar's just got to win. He's got to keep winning and just see what happens because it's out of his hands. Other than that, that's all he can do. But that doesn't guarantee him anything. And for Lando, it is pretty much in his own hands. And if he plays it the percentage game, he can win. If he's in dominant form, which you can sometimes turn up on a weekend and he is in dominant form and there's no one getting anywhere near him, well, fine, you take that as well. So yeah, it's obviously the odds very, very much favour Lando, but it's not inconceivable that there's some sort of incident and there's some sort of thing which completely changes the picture. We've seen this so many times before as the showdown comes closer. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But yes, Lando's in the best seat.
And obviously, Scott, in Piastri's case, he's admitted in that Beyond the Grid F1 podcast interview that the Monza thing did slightly affect him going to Baku, which was obviously his disaster weekend. And he admitted he was pushing a little bit too hard there and just all went wrong. But I guess the real question is whether the experience these past 3 weekends, because Mexico and Austin were sort of supposed to be 2 isolated tracks, and then Brazil kind of joined that because of the conditions there. And there must be that thing with going through Piastri's mind of, I just can't catch a break, because he just wants to get back on an even keel, doesn't he? And back to doing what he does, because he's got to be, because of that situation that he's been going through over the past few races, driving a little bit more consciously than he wants to, because obviously you're always best when it's just just doing the job, all unconscious processing, but he's been trying to sort of force it. So he'll be desperate just to go to Vegas and just hit the track and be comfortable immediately.
Yes, he'll hope to have everything in that very first practice session, and I think there were hints that the Brazil weekend was going to be a bit more like that for Piastri, and then obviously it went away from him in terms of the intra-team battle with Norris, but then also other circumstances as well made that weekend a lot worse than it could have been or should have been, depending on how you want to view it. And actually, this run of races for Piastri kind of goes like that. The circumstances around those three events make it a lot worse than it could have been, and therefore make the point situation much more unfavourable than it should have been. We need to keep in mind a couple of things. First is that Austin was worse because of the sprint race wipeout. Obviously, Norris didn't gain points on him there, but it was a bad weekend for Piastri in that sense. He lost points that he could have scored. He lost running that he sorely needed, given he was struggling there, and lost a little bit of momentum. It started, you can argue it either started or continued certain struggles in terms of maybe some decision making, but whatever. Then you look at Mexico, a very tricky one. The most anomalous one in terms of pace, in terms of discomfort, in terms of confusion as to why what he feels in the car doesn't translate into to speed. But if that race plays out slightly differently and Piastri doesn't have a couple of key setbacks in that race, there's a very we said this at the time, there was a very realistic path to a podium in that race for Piastri. He had the speed to do it. It wasn't like he was nowhere in terms of race pace. So that could have been very different as well. And then obviously Brazil, very, very different. Crashes out of the sprint race, has the penalty, which completely destroys his chance of mitigating the damage, the loss of points to Norris in the main race. So I'm sort of doing a bit of live mathematics in my head right now, which is not my strong suit, but I would say that there's anywhere from sort of 15 to 30 points that you could say Piastri's lost over the last 3 weekends that do make it look considerable. He would have lost the championship lead, and he should have lost the championship lead by virtue of being considerably second best 3 weekends in a row, but he shouldn't have had such as a disastrous swing as it's been. The other thing as well, which I think is important to factor in, is that we're into a part of the season that Piastri wasn't stunning through last year either. I don't know if it's because these are circuits that you only really get to experience in F1 a lot of the time, and therefore it just takes time to build that data bank. I think there are a couple of circuits that play really nicely to Norris's strengths. But I think if you go to Vegas, where Norris previously has really struggled because the understeer that it brings out in the car brings out the worst in him, and you go to a Qatar, which has a circuit layout that should, if all goes to plan, should suit Piastri really nicely, it could swing again over the next couple of races. So it's not a friendly run of the season historically for Piastri anyway, such as is the limited data with which we can say historically, but it's also been made to look worse than it's been.
Mark, do you think that what we're seeing here is just Piastri's relative inexperience letting him down? Because he's only in his third season. He's seemed for much of the year like he's a much more seasoned driver, but he's obviously up against a driver in Norris who's in his 7th year. Is it just that those areas of the data bank that haven't been filled up to the same extent that is costing him in this phase?
I'm sure there's something in that, but at the same time, when you're fighting for a championship, you get these opportunities, and they're the sort of things you have to overcome if you're going to win a championship. So, yeah, the good cars, the title-winning cars, happen to come to him very early in his career, and it's understandable that sometimes that's led to a certain, inconsistency, let's say, but that's just part of the challenge, isn't it? And we've seen drivers succeed, with similar amount of experience. So, yeah, I don't think it would be absolutely remarkable if Piastri won the title in his third season. It's just what a top driver should be able to do, given that level of car, or he should at least be able to fight for it. And he's shown that he is capable of fighting for it. So, but you can't really give yourself those excuses at this level, and I don't think he will. I don't think he will be. I mean, the people around him might be, but I don't think he will be. So you just got to forget that and work out what the formula is for, the track on any given day and any given weekend, and to crack that code and to do the job.
I think that point about Piastri not making excuses is a good one, and that will stand him in good stead. I guess the big question, Scott, is whether where he is now, almost a simplification of the mission could make it easier for him. Now, you could also have said that before Brazil, though, and that didn't help. So it almost trying to throw the same sort of hit and hope at it. But basically speaking, if he wants to win this championship, he needs to be outperforming Norris across at least 2 of the last 3 weekends, realistically, probably all 3, unless Norris has a disaster, doesn't he? So do you think that'll give him a certain degree of, okay, I know what I need to do. I need to go out and absolutely maximise this, leave it all out there on the track, as it were? Or does that just risk him overreaching rather than just following the process that served him so well for much of the season?
Yeah, I think the ideal, obviously, is that Piastri can just get in the car and drive. You made the point before about being able to drive unconsciously, whereas up until now, he has been having to think about it. He will also, I'm sure if he is world champion by the end of the race in Abu Dhabi, he won't really mind how it's happened, but he will want to get control of it back himself rather than inherit it. Because the easiest way, this went for Norris a couple of months ago, and it kind of happened for Norris, really. The easiest way for Piastri to make the ground up is for his main championship rival to stop scoring points and hit trouble. Now, Norris got that free pass from Piastri and didn't actually take full advantage of it. That was in Azerbaijan when Piastri had a shocker and then crashed out. But he chipped away at it. He chipped away at it across Monza, across Baku, across Singapore. And then he started pumping in the big numbers, which, while Piastri continued to struggle, not have completely disastrous non-scores, but struggled and had setbacks, then Norris was cashing in big. Piastri kind of needs any of that to happen, really. He's almost in it's like the football equivalent of a goal-shy striker who just needs to score one off his backside. Piastri kind of just needs a result, whichever way it will come in Vegas. I think he has to beat Norris in Vegas, mathematically, unless obviously it's a Norris win, a Piastri non-score. Then, mathematically, Piastri would still come away from Vegas thinking, okay, I've lost here, but I've got a sprint weekend and a final weekend. I can still do this. He'll be convincing himself until the numbers basically tell him otherwise. But I think he has to beat Norris in Vegas because it'll be a massive mountain to climb in terms of points, but just psychologically, just in terms of feeling within the car and that kind of what narrative demands, it just won't happen. So there is a lot riding on this weekend, and in that sense, that ability to drive freely and what you were saying about almost making the task easier because it becomes a much less complicated equation for him. That's I think at least offset. I don't know if it goes in the other direction, but I think it's cancelled out at the very least by the fact that it's all 3 weekends a make or break for Piastri in trying to overcome the points deficit now. He can't leave anything on the table, and that's what he's done for, half a dozen races now.
One thing I am interested in seeing over these final 3 events, Mark, is what we haven't generally seen this season is Norris kind of consistently being on top form over a long sequence of races. He's obviously had 2 fantastic events in Mexico and Brazil. So there's still that just little question mark about whether he's great when he's on that narrow peak, but he can slip off either side. Because you could say what we're seeing now is Norris hitting mega form and he'll be mighty to the end of the season. But while it seems like that, we don't know because we haven't got we need to go to the end of the year to actually see that at a big enough sample set to conclude that. Yeah,
I agree. His form has been over the season a little bit brittle, hasn't it? And so he's had a few weekends where he's just outright struggled to match Piastri, but not many. But he's had also more weekends than that where he's been either on the same pace as Piastri or even slightly quicker, where he's let something go wrong, and Piastri's ended up getting the bigger score. So is this part of the narrative? Obviously, there's a narrative to the season, but is it part of the narrative of what's really going on for each of those drivers? Or is it the individual traits of the circuit and how it works with the car and the tires on that particular weekend? And that's almost incidental what the sequencing of that is. It's just at this type of track, this will happen. At this type of track, this will happen. There's an element of that as well. And it appears to look like a narrative because obviously the season comprises these the sequence of races. But yeah, I think what may have happened is that Norris has got a better handle on the car than he did have early in the season in terms of how you get around this this trait that he doesn't like with the front end. And he's been in, obviously he's had the special suspension to get rid of the worst effects of that since Montreal, but he's also had to do a lot of rethinking with his engineer of subsequently. So in terms of how you get the best out of that without overstriving, without just going above on corner entry and losing the lap. So I think on those on that basis, yes, he's done that brilliantly well for the last two races, and you've really seen how formidable he can be when everything is right. Has he now got everything right with this car on a consistent basis to see him through these last three races?
And that ties in with what I was saying earlier about that kind of the reality of the first half of the season was not just Piastri is doing the better job here. Like Piastri was doing a fantastic job in the first 55-60% of the season. And I remember his race engineer, Tom Stallard, telling me just before the summer break, like, it only seems inevitable because of all of the work that's gone in to make it so. To say it's just inevitable kind of underestimates and undervalues actually all of the work done to get it to this point. But at the same time, there was also an element that Norris had several weekends where he was very marginally, but still the faster McLaren driver, and didn't do a good enough job with it. That's why, I'm sure there'll be people pointing this out if Lando does win the World Championship. There's a video on the Race YouTube channel where we pointed out that basically the ways that Norris was, or where Norris was blowing his big title chance. And a lot of that boiled down to the drop-off over the course of qualifying, and either overreaching, not quite having the right finesse or feedback that he needed to deal with the cues that he wanted or had to have through the front axle, which just meant when it came down to those absolutely final on the limit laps in qualifying, Norris was just making little mistakes here and there. Now, because of experience in the car, because of maybe relaxing a little bit more and doing a better job himself, because of the changes to the tweaks to the front suspension setup that Mark mentioned that came in Canada, a combination of these things, a greater percentage of any one of them, who knows, only Norris, and maybe even then not 100% really sure. Lando might not be 100% sure exactly what the makeup is, but Norris has, at the moment, right when it counts, seems to have eliminated that. What we don't know, because of how far off it Piastri's been, is whether Norris in Mexico and Brazil could have done what he did to the level he did it at, when he was really, really under pressure. Because it's very easy to forget now when Norris was making those mistakes in the first half of the year. That's because Piastri was right there. Piastri was giving him basically thousandths of a second to play with in the first half of the season. So, and whereas in the last few weekends it's been tense, hasn't it? So there's been a bit more wiggle room. Maybe that's relieved some of the pressure. Maybe Norris enjoyed being the hunter for a bit less pressure on him in that way as well. All of these factors, there's tangibles and intangibles in all of that, and it is absolutely fascinating to not know how that has played out or how that's manifested in what we've seen. But it all creates the situation you said before, Ed, which is that we have the evidence of the first part of the season, we have the evidence of the recent races, including the most recent races, and then we still have the unknown of the last three. So we can predict, and we can use as much of the data that we have available to predict as we can, and sometimes that manifests as a gut feeling, but the simple fact is we don't know if this will swing back the other way.
Yeah, well, what's happened in the past doesn't necessarily predict what will happen in the future. And the hope is that Piastri can fight back, because we want this one to go down to the wire in Abu Dhabi. Right, we're going to hit pause on our title running discussion for a moment, have a brief look further ahead into 2026. We've partnered with Shell to help tell the story of fuels in F1, and in the final instalment, we hear about Shell's preparations for 2026, when the fuel rules are changing alongside everything else. Right, Mark, let's take a look at the three tracks now and how, in particular, they might suit McLaren and the two main title protagonists, because, of course, Max Verstappen is still an outsider in this whole question, but we'll talk a little bit about him later. So, first up, Las Vegas.
Yeah, McLaren really struggled there last year, although they were quick in the last stint when they tried something extreme, or Lando tried something extreme with how the car was set up and in terms of how he was using the tools rather, and how he was driving it. He was actually quick in the last stint, but it was too late to make any difference by then. It's a circuit which is, the timings of the race mean the track's usually very cool, which obviously suited the Mercedes very well last year. And this Mercedes looks to have similar traits in that it overworks its tyres in terms of temperature. So when you go to a cool track, it's very quick. So we could expect the Mercedes to be quick. The Red Bull, who knows? It's been a bit volatile of late. But the McLaren, yeah, it's you don't go to Vegas thinking, oh, this is a surefire McLaren track. This is a potential track where McLaren may not be the fastest car, may not even be the second fastest car, but it'll be somewhere in the mix, not far away. But yeah, there's no certainty going in. So when it's like that, we've seen so far that if there is a pattern, when it's a struggle to get those front tyres working in time for a qualifying lap, that Piastri has struggled with that a little bit of late, and that is more binary style. Sometimes just can't get those fronts in time for the beginning of the lap, whereas the way Lando's sort of manipulates the braking and the cornering a bit more has been enough. It was certainly, you saw this in Mexico, has been enough just to get the process initiated, where the core of the tire begins to get some energy into it, and it balances out with the tread temperature, and the whole process begins to work, and you get to that threshold of temperature where everything's fine. So that's a potential hazard, particularly for Piastri. But it's one that he's very aware of, and he's spoken a little bit about it after Mexico, and talking about the way that he uses the tools with the car. So yeah, it poses an interesting question, Vegas, because of its just because of its nature and the cool track temperature.
Scott, McLaren have sort of been equivocal about Las Vegas. There's hopes that they will have made some gains going into this year. Graining shouldn't be a problem, because even though the cool temperatures can lead to that being a problem, the tyres this year are much more graining resistant. That's something that Pirelli worked on, which could be good news for Norris, because he certainly doesn't like it if there's front graining. That's a problem for him. China was a great example of that this year. So are you expecting McLaren to give it a bit of a better shot this year, or do you still think this is the great unknown weekend for them?
It's certainly the one of the final three where you'd be less confident that McLaren's going to be on top. The different characteristics of the 2025 tyres is a significant variable versus last year, not just in terms of the way that stints will play out, but also the relative competitiveness over each car, even over a single lap, and also the drivers within that, because the Piastri Norris thing in terms of that dealing with the low grip, I find very interesting, because as Piastri has said himself, he's had plenty of low grip tracks or lower grip tracks earlier in the year where it seemed to be fine, and now all of a sudden it doesn't seem to work. But that what gets very vaguely termed low grip can manifest itself in very different ways, and then also can have different consequences as a result of that. Like if you've got the low grip and the front axle is sliding around in a certain way, you'll get that front graining that Norris struggles with so much, and that has been such a significant factor in Vegas before. And who knows, even with slightly different tyres, could be a factor again this weekend. But if you have it where the front's not graining, but it's low grip all round and there's a bit more sliding, then maybe that just plays right back to Norris's strengths again, and it's a continuation of the last few weekends where he can really lean on the car and manipulate the car in a way that Piastri just struggles to, just by comparison. And suddenly that low grip nature is to Norris's benefit, not Piastri's. So, yeah, there's different kind of subplots within that. Obviously, the championship being a significant one, but in that umbrella topic of does the nature of who will the Vegas track suit by its nature. So it's fascinating. There's a part of me that wonders, depending on sort of exactly how it plays out, you'd never really want to bank on Mercedes being the favourite anywhere. But I do wonder if this could be a race where there's like a big opportunity for Piastri, and that if he can be the best McLaren driver, this feels like, even though it's an uncertainty from McLaren's overall competitiveness, it might be Piastri's best chance to take points off Norris, because it feels like one where any of the teams could have one or two drivers in the mix at the front. And if it's more open, then yes, it's trickier, but it also means there's a bit more on the table in terms of getting other cars between him and Norris on track.
Yeah, and even if he's only taking 3-5 points out of him, that's still significant and just boosts his chances somewhat. Let's move now on to Qatar, Mark. Fair to say that's probably a track that's made for McLaren, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. High speed and interconnected long bends, perfect McLaren territory and perfect Piastri territory as well. So I think if of the last three races, I had to say which one will Piastri, heavily favoured for, I would say Qatar. And I think that should be a straight McLaren contest between the two drivers that whole weekend. I'd be surprised if it wasn't. The corners go on a little bit too long for the way the Red Bull's balanced. The tyre demands, rear tyre demands, are perfect for the way the McLaren looks after its rear tyres. It should be nailed on McLaren, you would think. There's always things that crop up that can spoil that can spoil the expectations. But going in, that's what I would expect.
Yeah, and of course, it was in Qatar that Piastri got his first F1 race win in the sprint in 2023. But Scott, there is something of a wild card because Pirelli has got approval to have a 25-lap maximum stint length or maximum number of laps on a tyre, not just a stint. So if you start with 3-lap old tyres, you can only go 22. So that's going to mean it's effectively a mandatory two-stopper. So can you just explain a little bit about why that's happening?
Yes, so that is basically on safety grounds. It's slightly different to, if you remember back in 2023, when there was an even shorter maximum stint length, wasn't it? 18 laps, I think, in 2023. But that was a reaction to something that was observed during the weekend, where Pirelli clocked what it's calling micro lacerations on the tyres, and so that was reactionary in the moment. This has been the result of extensive discussions in advance of the Qatar Grand Prix weekend, off the back of obviously what happened last year. Now, last year you didn't have the mandated stint length, so everybody can guess very easily what that meant. What teams tried to do, the longest, most aggressive stint lengths that you can possibly do to try and minimise having to come into the pits. What that resulted in, obviously, we saw two failures in particular, Lewis Hamilton and Carlos Sainz. We thought it might be due to debris on the circuit, but it wasn't. The tyres had basically just been pushed to the point where the structural fatigue was increased. They were just too worn out, basically, and the combination of that plus the nature of the circuit, the location of some of the curbs, particularly the exit curbs, the speeds that cars are going through there, and therefore the loads that are being placed on the tyres, puts a lot through. I think it's just the front left in particular, isn't it, at Qatar, which ends up being very vulnerable. The result of all of those discussions is an agreement that this 25-lap maximum stint length, and you're right, on the set of the tyre. So like laps to the grid don't count, laps after checkered flags don't count, but basically counted laps in sessions are what contributes to that tally. So if you're in a virtual safety car or safety car, it doesn't matter. That's still a lap that comes off the the life of that tyre in Pirelli's eyes. So Pirelli will be saying basically on race day for the sprint, sprint's irrelevant, but race day for the Grand Prix, how many laps are left on each set that each team has available, basically. And that's all been agreed. It's a known factor, known variable going into the weekend. It's been communicated already because it's part of that kind of 2-week foresight that Pirelli provides in terms of the information for each Grand Prix. And it'll be interesting because although there's an element of it where you go, oh, this is now prescribed strategy, there's not going to be any variation. Not true, because how teams use their tyres through the weekend is going to govern how much life they have on each set if they don't have all new sets for Sunday's race. But also, you could have some teams look at it and just go, well, everyone is locked into a 2-stop. So actually, based on what data they get, there could be some teams that go, there's an opportunity here if we just commit to the 3-stop. I doubt that will happen. I imagine everybody will still be wedded to the stop as few times as you can. But you never know. If you see Ware being particularly aggressive, and there is a big gain to be had by having fresher tyres, softer tyres, whatever it ends up being for a final stint versus however many laps on a medium or a hard managing a 2-stop, maybe there'll be a gain to be had there. So I still think there's something intriguing to discover when we go back to that track.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be a factor that just adds a little bit of interest to the race weekend. And of course, the problem was last year, basically you're incentivized to stay on the mediums for as long as you possibly can because you weren't really deg limited. So yeah, that was why they've had to put this in, to avoid the situation where people are persuaded to run on the mediums far longer than is perhaps wise given the actual physical wear of the tyre. Right. Last up, we've got Abu Dhabi, Mark. We're hoping the title fight will still be alive by the time we get there, but what should we expect in Abu Dhabi?
Yeah, I think probably quite a evenly matched contest between McLaren and Red Bull, actually. And looking at the demands, the Red Bull quicker through the fast corners, the McLaren probably better at the end of the lap when there's a few traction zones and the rear tyres have got a bit hot. So, yeah, I think we could expect a strong Verstappen challenge for that weekend, and he'll be for sure going into it with the attitude of nothing to lose. And that may yet turn out to have a significant impact upon the championship between the McLaren drivers. So, yeah, I think everything points to that being a very, very tightly contested weekend. With the implications of every little move magnified by the title contest.
You have to say, Scott, it's not a great track for a title decider, because if you look at the title deciders we've had there, with the exception of 2021, which was obviously completely transformed by the late safety car and everything happening around that.
What happened in 2021? Generally,
you can go back and listen to many, many podcasts about that from the time if anybody wants to check about that. But obviously, the other title deciders we've had there have mainly been characterised by people not overtaking and quite static races. So thinking of 2010 with Alonso stuck behind Petrov, and the 2016 decider when it was all about Lewis Hamilton trying to back Nico Rosberg up into people. That's the kind of title decider venue that it's been, isn't it?
Yes, it's definitely a place for a sort of cagier race. It's also that's also a little bit of 2021 aside. It's also a bit of a product of the kinds of championship fights that have gone to the wire, where you do need this kind of, you need outside intervention basically for the title to change hands. So that's why you have, sometimes that might happen through circumstances like in 2010 when the race plays out very differently all of a sudden because of variables that either teams have either poorly foreseen or just failed to foresee at all. But then you could have, 2016 is a different example. There's an element of 2021 in that as well, because obviously 2021, before it all kicked off at the end, featured Sergio Perez backing up Lewis Hamilton, which ended up being very significant in terms of the time loss there and the gap that he had to Verstappen in that race. But that was similar in 2016, Hamilton backing up Rosberg to try and get someone else involved. That was slightly different because it was between the two direct championship rivals, but Abu Dhabi's quite good for that, at least, where it is hard to overtake, and therefore that means that if you're the car in front and you need to back up the car behind, you have a little bit to play with there. You can manipulate things a little bit more. The sad thing is, and I would love to be proven wrong on this, is I don't think it's the kind of place where we're just simply going to see the championship won in a wheel-to-wheel fight. Like, it defies all kind of history, really, of the Yas Marina circuit and expectation. It'll be that'll be one where, like, if you're the McLaren drivers and it is genuinely somehow a winner takes all finale, that's where, like, everything's geared to that qualifying session on the Saturday and getting the track position, because there is that opportunity on the opening lap, and this happened in Abu Dhabi in 2021. But if there's a track other than a street circuit like Monaco, where you're like, okay, this is going to be the season finale, so therefore I'm going to want track position after quali, like, Abu Dhabi's really high up the list, if not at the very top, from a circuit point of view rather than a street track. So I'm hoping that all of this sort of trepidation for it, in terms of like what it can throw up, is blown out of the water by a very, very fascinating run-in, if the championship obviously goes that far. But I don't think it will be, the gloves are off, absolutely everything is on the line, and there's going to be a mega battle that decides the title there. It'll kind of just be in a way, a fitting place for a championship battle like this to be decided, where it has just been these basically swings in pace all season that have decided the outcome of the title, rather than individual acts of heroism or emerging on top of particularly fierce combat.
I think it's also worth noting that it's quite a nice place for the championship, potentially the championship decider, to happen for Lando Norris, because not only did he win there last year, but he's actually got a pretty good body of work at that track. He's got lots of decent results in cars that weren't winning McLarens there, so it's a track that he's gone very, very well at in the past as well. Right, Scott, we've only mentioned him in passing so far, but is Max Verstappen still in this title fight? I put him in it after he had that big weekend in Austin, and he was still in it after Mexico, and the gap was down to 36 points, but it's ballooned to 49 now.
Yeah. So are you officially removing him from the title battle again?
I mean, I think he has fallen back out of it again with Red Bull's struggles.
Yeah. I throw that question straight back at you, because obviously we've talked about this kind of, do we seriously consider him in contention quite a lot over the last couple of months, and I think having got himself into contention, in Austin in particular, and then did a good job in Mexico. So yes, Norris pulled away from him, but the actual gap to the top was slightly trimmed. I don't think he can now be out. Having got into it, I don't think he can be out of it until he's out of it properly. So I'm still considering him in contention, but he's very, very much the outsider. And I'd now be very surprised if Max is world champion, which I don't think is a particularly controversial thing to say, even though there's very little more he could do himself, especially the second half of the year. I think he's been absolutely magnificent, and for most of 2025 he's probably been the best performing driver. Not going to give away too much, because we'll obviously we'll have a ranking of the drivers at the end of the year, but if you're looking at a driver and a team that just coming back to what you said earlier, Ed, about Piastri and whether it becomes simpler, it's simpler than ever for Verstappen and Red Bull. I don't think they can get too carried away by this. They seem to be I seem to be hearing talk of risk-taking quite a lot in the Laurent Mekies era. And sometimes it's dangerous, because risk-taking flirts with, just try it for the sake of trying it, which I don't think is something that Red Bull's reached for. But, some of those explanations, and like when they try stuff and it doesn't work, and it's basically being described as a gamble, even though they don't use the word gamble, but they use the word risk. So there's a degree of not knowing, whether what they'll do will actually work. It's kind of like, it's the F1 equivalent of informed speculation, I suppose, but in a very much a setup and engineering sense. I don't think they can go too far with that, because otherwise you just run the risk of just throwing away the final 3 weekends individually, just by like trying to chase something that isn't there. But if there's a team that can go aggressive on the strategy calls, it's Red Bull, because they're solely focused on Verstappen. If there's a driver who we know is willing to take risks and has the least to lose, it's Verstappen. And if it's a driver who can drive without any pressure, because he's not in it for a world championship by his own expectations and has also racked up 4 already, so he's not got his first title on the line, it's Verstappen. So he's in, points-wise, a very unenviable position. But in terms of the approach he can take to the final 3 weekends, Max is in a very good spot. And Max doesn't need an invitation to be very single-minded about this kind of thing, and that's not an insult. That's just basically like, he's really good at just going, well, this is the thing in front of me, I'm going to get on with it. So, mate, I don't know. That's one of those intangible advantages, potentially, where it's like you can't put a number on that, but you can just, it could be vibes, it could be gut feeling, it could be the way it plays out over the weekend. But it's the bigger question mark is obviously where the Red Bull's going to be. And that's the problem. Like, it's not like the Red Bull is just going to consistently be the best car for the final 3 races. Max has got a load of points to catch up, so it's just about what happens to the McLarens. It's a massive question mark over whether he'll have the machinery to beat them or even race them.
Yeah, well, what he needs is the McLaren drivers to drive into each other, and if that happens and he can win Vegas, it changes things. Basically, I mean, I'm not saying he definitely is completely out of the championship. It's just he's not in proper contention as it stands. But what he can do is, if he can get to Abu Dhabi still in it, even if he's just hanging on, then, you know, where there's life, there's hope, isn't there? So that's kind of the mission for Verstappen and Red Bull. Mark, how about Mercedes and Ferrari? Are they going to have a part to play in how the championship shakes out? And could there be a victory on the table for one of those two teams? I mean, what am I saying? It's going to be Mercedes if they win one, isn't it? I think we've given up on Ferrari for this year. But how do you see those two feeding into it?
They would definitely can play a part. And actually, Mercedes and Ferrari tended to be good on the same weekends and bad on the same weekends. But yeah, Mercedes generally better than Ferrari. But they can definitely play a part in terms of if they get a big result, say if they can get a 1-2 in Vegas, say, which is not beyond the realms of possibility, then you know you're really limiting the big points that the McLaren drivers can take off each other. So yeah, in that sense, we may be able to look back and say, yeah, well, that the Merc form at Vegas, for example, really swung that in driver A's favor or driver B's favor. So in that sense, they can play a part. Yes, Ferrari less so. I think Ferrari is just sort of on its good weekends is just about hanging off the tail end of that. So I think in terms of decisive results, you would be looking at Merc, and with the improving form of Kimi Antonelli in the last few races, the chances of them getting two cars scoring big points, taking big points off the McLaren driver, it's not insignificant.
Are we completely ruling out Charles Leclerc winning Vegas?
No, but I think less likely than Mercedes.
Yeah, I that feels like the best chance that Ferrari's got. A bit of Leclerc magic in Vegas on a weekend where the order's a little bit shaken up and nobody's the strongest. Like I could be completely wrong about this, but something, maybe it's just the history of the first couple of installments of the race, but Vegas does just feel like one where it could be the team that's the least bad ends up with the crucial advantage that weekend. A bit like not like Norris was very strong in Brazil, but like that was a confusing Saturday in Brazil, for example. After, sprint weekends, conditions changing, it had been a little bit tricky, qualifying catching everybody out. Good gosh, is a Haas really in contention for pole at this one? that kind of qualifying session as Q1 and Q2 evolved. And like Vegas just has the potential to be weird in its own way. And when it's a bit weird, when it's a bit difficult, and it's a street track, and you've just had the big boss reaming everybody out, basically. I mean, that just feels like Leclerc magic territory, but it also feels like one car eighth, one car out in Q2 territory because it's Ferrari. So I don't know. Like, maybe I'm talking myself out of thinking that there's some heroics there, but yeah, I think Vegas is the chance for one of the two teams to interfere.
Yeah, and I do wonder if Vegas might be not that opportunity for Antonelli to get that win. If he has a Interlagos style level of performance, then perhaps he could get his first win there. Now, Mark, there's another subplot, which is the battle for sixth in the Constructors' Championship, which isn't that high profile, but hugely important to the teams given how much cash there is at stake. So we've got Racing Bulls on 82, Aston Martin 72, Haas 70, Sauber 62. Who would you say is favourite in that scrap?
Or Racing Bulls, just on the mathematics of it, but I think also in the practicalities of it, it's a very versatile car, isn't it? It's pretty good on any type of circuit. There's not as much variability between, a slow track, slow corner track and a fast corner track, say, than there is with the Aston Martin or something like that. The Sauber tend to be a good race car, not maybe as good in qualifying, and the Haas is coming on very strong. Well, Ollie Behrman's Haas is coming on very strong in the last few races. So they've all got the potential to pull a big result that's going to be critical in deciding that position. But if you're looking at the spread of probabilities, you'd say Racing Bulls is in the best position. It's got two cars capable of scoring. It's got a car which is capable of getting in Q3 at any or all of the remaining three tracks. So, yeah, I'd say they're favourite, but I wouldn't rule out the Sauber pulling out a double points, a heavy double points finish somewhere along the line, or I think Behrman's just probably wringing absolutely everything there is to get from that Haas now towards the end of the season as he's built up his experience. And the Aston Martin is just you more or less know going into the weekend what it's going to do based on the track characteristics. If it's a track where you pile a lot of downforce on, it'll be okay. If it's a track where it's about aero efficiency, it'll be nowhere. So yeah, there was a phase where it was looking quite good for Aston, and once they got their upgrade working, but its form is still very up and down.
Yeah, I think Haas is the interesting one because even though they've got a few points to make up, the upgrade in Austin puts them in a really good place. But they really need Ocon to start contributing more points. I think he's got 3 points in the last 8. And the annoying thing is for them is that Ocon's race pace has actually been pretty good, but he's really struggling in qualifying. And then he has these races like, well, I got stuck in traffic. There's been a path to points potentially in some of those recent races where he hasn't scored. But when you're starting 15th or you're eliminated in Q1, it's just not great for him. The one thing we should say, Scott, is are we absolutely certain that Williams is safe in this battle? They're up the road. They're on 111 points with Racing Bulls on 82, which normally should be fine. But Interlagos last year showed that in exceptional circumstances, you can get a big old haul.
Yes, and as we were talking about with, whether Mercedes and Ferrari can get into it at the front, if there's going to be a place where that happens, it's most likely going to be Las Vegas, just with different conditions and a different track and whatnot. Abu Dhabi, I'd be surprised if there's a big swing there, but Qatar with a safety car potential, or different teams playing the strategy restrictions differently. Maybe it turns out come race day in Qatar that there's actually a more ideal way of playing that mandatory or minimum 2-stop race, which can cause a swing. And was it? Am I right in thinking it was Qatar a couple of years ago that Haas got it wrong really badly? I'm sure it was. There was a race like that where I think it might have been 2023, when basically Haas I think ended up like covering an immediate rival rather than focusing on what the best race opportunity was for them, and that's something that team's worked really hard on. Is trying to make sure it has sort of better clarity of thought in those sort of crunch decisions. So I would say, it's in chronological order really, the opportunity for there to be a big swing. Vegas probably the most likely, then Qatar, and then Abu Dhabi. So I think if Williams come out of Vegas still with 25, 30 points to the good or something like that, I think they're pretty much home and dry by that point. But I think Vegas just has the potential to be like, all it needs is a Williams non-score and then a really nice double score from one of the, and then it's like, okay, there's still 2 weekends to go here. And then you go to Qatar, and I would imagine Williams will be quite good in Qatar, but if you have Haas, for example, fly there, there's 2 point scoring opportunities there for a really, really strong midfield team. So that could easily be a weekend where one team scores, takes double digits out of the Williams points gap too. So yeah, not quite as secure as it's looked at different stages of this year, even though obviously it is still a good position to be in.
Yeah, and that whole thing's going to be a nice little subplot for these final 3 races, which are going to be a fantastic rapid-fire way to round out what's been a fantastic season. I think just the hope is we can go to Abu Dhabi and it's still a live title fight, and ideally all 3 of those drivers still in contention. That's all I ask for. So hopefully it'll be a really, really exciting finale. Well, thanks very much, Scott and Mark, for your insight. I'm going to pack my bags and drive up to Las Vegas now. So stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.